Singing Dutchman Productions. Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends, old and new, and have honest conversations. Today I welcome Ethan Rode to the front porch, a friend and fellow soldier in the war for language preservation. Let's put it that way. Ethan, welcome to the front porch.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so friends of the show, you know that from time to time I'll have guests on that come from the same vein of Pennsylvania Dutch people as I do, and that's tonight's interview. We're going to be talking some Pennsylvania Dutch, not necessarily in the language. I know not everybody that listens to the podcast can understand that, but we're going to be talking about some Pennsylvania Dutch topics. But before we get to that, Ethan, I like to start every episode by allowing my audience to kind of get to know you a little bit better. Could you tell us where you grew up and what kind of things were you into as a kid? Like, were you into music? Were you playing sports? Those types of things. Tell us a little bit about young Ethan.
Sure. Hi everyone. Um, I'm originally from Moton, Pennsylvania. For the first 11 years of my life, I grew up on a farm between Moton and Nowers off Wyomissing Road. And then when I was 11, my family and I moved to the Philadelphia area, where I lived until I graduated high school, and now I'm up in Canada. When I was a kid, I had a lot of weird specific interests when I was a kid. I I went through an era where I wanted to be like an ornithologist. I was really into birds. I was really into trees. Um, I was really into nature as a kid. I still am, but like not as a career. And didn't really do much in the way of sports, but just sort of, yeah. I just had a lot of weird specific interests when I was a kid. That's me in a nutshell.
Did you have siblings?
Yes, I have a younger brother. He's 17 months younger than I am. And yeah, he's up living with my grandparents now. But yeah, so we both grew up together on the farm, and yeah,
So just out of curiosity, because I didn't know this about you, the farm that you grew up on, was it a working farm or more like a gentleman's farm?
it was a gentleman's farm, but like in the like it wasn't producing a lot. Like we had beef cattle. We My dad raised anywhere between 15 to 20 Scottish Highland cows, and um, we'd have them butchered, and we'd eat their meat, but I don't think we ever sold the meat, come to think of it. But yeah, we did have cows, so it like worked for us, if that makes sense. I don't know what the proper lingo is for that, to be
No, but I
honest.
always ask anybody that I run into that grew up as a child on a farm, I always like to ask them this question. What did growing up on a farm teach you?
Oh, so much. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I think you also grew up on a farm, right? So you sort of get it. I mean, just having the space to run and play, go for walks, and hearkening back to my ornithological, I don't even know if that's a word, ornithology dreams, being around nature and all of that. And just like privacy too, like I learned so much about everything. And yeah, I really wouldn't trade that experience for the world. And I don't, most of my friends that are in my generation just don't have that connectedness with like the earth. So, I'm really, really blessed and grateful that I got to have that experience.
That answer is what is almost I always get the same the vast majority of people always give kind of that same response. It's always this connectedness to the earth, which I mean it's something you have to experience, really. You can't I don't think you can be taught it. I guess you can be taught it, but as a kid learning it like
Yeah.
that from first, I just think it's a wonderful gift that we were given. Is same. I echo everything you said. So you were into birds, you were into nature. In high school, you graduate high school, then where does the road of life take you after that?
So the road took me up I-81 to Kingston, Ontario, Canada, where I studied at Queen's University. I majored in linguistics and minored in political studies. And I graduated in 2022. And now I live in Ottawa, Ontario, and do a lot of work in transcription and language stuff here, and also online with Pennsylvania Dutch stuff. But yeah, after high school, I was dead set. I was like, I want to move to Canada and I want to become a linguist. Those were like my two aspirations
So it's
after high
perfect because
school.
that's two of the questions I actually had written down here before we started the interview. Number one, where did the linguistic love of languages come from?
A lot of places actually, I think. I grew up in a, I guess, bicultural family. My dad's family is Pennsylvania Dutch, which is where I get my love of that. And my mom's family is Jewish. So I grew up around Pennsylvania Dutch, Hebrew, Yiddish. I took Spanish in school for 10 years and loved that. I love English. And so just being around all of those languages, I think, had a very profound experience on my growing brain and just sent me down the path of linguistics. And, I mean, linguistics is not everyone knows this. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, you studied linguistics, so you speak all these languages." And I mean, I do speak, a handful of languages, but I, it's the scientific approach, right? So, I was never like like a biology, physics, chemistry kind of kid. My science was always language, and knowing that that was a field that I could choose was, you know, I loved it. And as soon as I did some research and realized that that was what I wanted to do, it's been my everyday ever since.
So, just to, you said you were hearing these languages growing up. What influence and role, how much Pennsylvania Dutch did you hear as a kid?
Um, Bits and pieces. Definitely not like my dad's mom, my nana. She grew up with the language and uses a lot of the language. So I grew up hearing her speak it. My grandfather also grew up with the language, sort of, but doesn't speak it fluently. So I always knew words here and there. And it was always something that like I think I took for granted as a kid. It's like, it's what it is, and it's who I am, and that's whatever, however teenagers feel about that kind of stuff at the time. Um, so yeah, I grew up hearing bits and pieces, but uh, my grandmother actually gifted me a Pennsylvania German dictionary, the C. Richard Beam pink book, and I think I was 13 or 14 years old when she gave me that. And that was just when I was starting to get interested in the Pennsylvania Dutch aspect of my heritage. And I read that. I mean, I read the dictionary cover to cover, like actually like a novel. I read it cover to cover, and so ever since then, stumbling upon your PA Dutch 101 videos that are like 12 years old now, probably 13 years old, were a huge like formative part of my learning journey. So yeah, I sort of surrounded myself with it
Yeah,
more or
and we're gonna
less.
we're gonna come back to that topic for sure. But I want to ask you this too, because you said after high school you decided I'm going to college, but you're not going to college at Kutztown or Millersville. You're saying
No,
I'm going to a different country. What not every kid's gonna think of doing something like that, let alone actually making it happen. So can I ask why Canada? And then, how was that received by your parents? Were they like, "Oh yeah, 100% we support you," or was there hesitation for you moving to a different country and, all that kind of stuff?
yeah, you're right, and I don't think a lot of kids are like, oh, I'm gonna go to Canada, but my best friend growing up actually is Canadian. So I spent a lot of time, like, we visited her grandmother outside of Toronto. And, before that, really, I hadn't spent much time in Canada, but I really just love the country and the people. And, I was like, I could see myself living here, like, permanently. And so I spoke to my parents about it, and they thought about it, but they supported me. They really supported me. And there were a lot of other countries on the table too originally. Like I had considered moving to Ireland, I had considered moving to Germany, and while my parents would also have been supportive of that, I think they were secretly glad that I chose, well, not so secretly glad that I chose a neighboring country rather than going to Europe. So yeah, it ended up working out, and I'm still here.
Yeah, well, I mean, and yeah, it's exactly. It's a drivable country. The
Yeah,
the bridge to Europe isn't finished yet. No,
no,
and I've been to Canada many times. I have many Canadian friends, and I do want to plug real quick, people. If you have yet to experience the joy that is Canada, you have to. You have to
absolutely,
go. It is
100%.
a beautiful country, and yeah, exactly what you said. The people are even more beautiful than the country itself. So there's my plug for the Canadian Tourism Board. If they want to know that, let them do with it what they
They'll
like.
appreciate it, I'm sure.
So you've been living up there a couple years now. Looking back on it, just really quickly, what about since you've been living in Canada now? What are the things that you really appreciate about your new country, and what things do you miss from down home here?
Well, I'll start with what I miss because there's actually quite a lot I miss about the US. I think some people feel like when you're, what's the word, an expatriate or like someone who just goes, that it's like, oh, I hate where I'm from. But that's actually not it. It's quite the opposite. And as I've been away longer, the more I miss, Pennsylvania. Obviously, I miss easy access to speaking Pennsylvania Dutch. I mean, that's a huge one for me. But I mean, Philadelphia is such an awesome city, and there are things where it's like, oh, I wish this were here, or I wish that were here. Like, I mean, I live in Ottawa, but there isn't a huge Jewish community in this city like there is in Philadelphia. So I miss Jewish food and things like that. There's certain things where it's like, oh, my grandmother can't cook it for me, or I can't just go to my favorite Jewish deli when I want something. So there's that I miss. Sometimes the attitude as well. Like Philadelphians get a bad reputation for being mean, but to be honest, uh, yes, some of it is mean, but like I think also Philadelphians get things done, and
They
sometimes
do,
I'm
they
and
do, and they're
I have to bring it out sometimes in Canada because people are like, "Oh, sorry, no," and I'll be like, "Okay, no, here comes Philadelphia and Ethan. I'm gonna, give it to you straight."
directness and brand loyalty. I think is Philadelphia to a T. You're
Yes.
right, and I mean, like I said, I've been to Canada many times, and I know lots of Canadians. But is that? I mean, there is this stereotype that all Canadians are always apologizing and always saying "excuse me." Have you found that to be true living there now, as long as you have, or
I
is that a
think
stereotype?
I think some people sensationalize it a bit, like most things, but I will say, since living here, I I will bump into someone, or no, someone will bump into me like physically in the grocery store where they'll rub shoulders, and I'll be like, "Oh, sorry," even though I wasn't the one in their way. And like I just so maybe some of it is exaggerated, but there is definitely that in Canada, like that niceness, and it's not even. I don't think it's necessarily like oh, I'm sorry for hurting you. It's sort of like an excuse me, or like I'm here sort of thing. People just say sorry. And I actually learned that it's an inherited thing from the British. Apparently the British do that a lot too. So but yeah, there is a lot of sorry up here.
So besides that, what aspects of your new country do you really appreciate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the niceness is a really big one. Of the niceness of the people. I love the. I mean, the U.S. is multicultural as well, so I feel like Canada. I can't say that is particularly unique about Canada, but I like how Canada. There's a different philosophy to multiculturalism in Canada. In the U.S., I grew up maybe they've changed this since I was in elementary school, but we grew up learning about the melting pot. In Canada, it's referred to as the mosaic, where so while all these little tiles are put together, you still have your own uniqueness still. Whereas I think the melting pot sort of speaks more to assimilation rather than maintaining your uniqueness. And I don't want to get too into that because that becomes
No, but
political. But like,
let me throw this at you really quick, because whenever I give talks anywhere, and always about Pennsylvania Dutch type stuff, I always bring that point up, exactly that point. I don't use mosaic. I use the idea of a quilt. Since a quilt is
yes,
made of scraps of cloth, and each have their individuality and their individualness, when they come together to form one giant quilt, you have one thing, but you can step back and still see the individual aspects. And I agree with the Canadian theory on that too. I think melting pot has has its issues, I think, and I know not everybody
Yeah,
agrees with me on that, but I agree with, and I don't know. I mean, I'm in public education, and I don't know exactly in the elementary level how much the melting pot theory is still instructed. I know my kids, my own personal children, are my sons and well, my daughter's in middle school, but my son's in elementary school, and as we were going through, social studies lessons, and I think we're doing a better job at that in America in regards to teaching from maybe that perspective than the old perspective, but we still have some things we can work on for sure.
yeah.
But anyway, I digress. Sorry, sorry, sorry.
No, but the quilt is a great, and very Pennsylvania Dutch specific example, and I think it puts it in terms that our people might, grasp better. And yeah, I agree. I think if you take a step back, you can see all the individual pieces. You can, I mean, in Canada, there's a huge indigenous component. There's also that in the U.S. as well, but I think in Canada, those issues are amplified more than other issues, just due to the fact that there's a higher percentage of them here in Canada.
Oh, and
Um,
how Canada deals with multilingualism too, and
oh yeah,
and the promotion of other languages within Canada. Like you said, First Nations peoples. I mean, they're in their territories. They'll have street signs. They'll have things in, and of course we know Quebec and French speaking Canada. I think the
well,
Canadians are way better at that, way better than that than we are.
and I know, and maybe I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but I've certainly talked to other Pennsylvania Dutch movers and shakers, and I look at Quebec. Obviously, I mean they have a very strict French law, which has pros and cons like everything. But even looking at other like European languages that have been brought over that have become unique dialects, like in Nova Scotia, for instance, Canadian Gaelic is a dialect of Scottish Gaelic, and you go to Cape Breton Island, which is where they speak it still, and you have the street signs and everything, and yeah, I agree. I think multilingualism is something that Canadians are very proud of, whether it's indigenous languages or recent immigrants who have come, or immigrants from colonial times that have maintained their own unique dialects. So yeah, it's Canada certainly does a better job with that in my experience. um, and it's something that's, as having studied linguistics and speaks a minority language that was a unique dialect from Europe. It is something that I wish either Pennsylvania as at the state level, or the U.S. as a whole would look a little bit more into.
We're trying. We're trying. We've been
Yeah,
trying for years.
I know. Well, right, and it's exactly, and it's not for a lack of trying. It's just it's just how it goes. It's
Right.
just government processes or red tape, whatever. It's a lot of it. It's a lot of that.
So we've danced around the Pennsylvania Dutch bush, but it's time to like get into the bush now. So a couple questions I've been thinking, and you already alluded to the fact that you've recently been teaching Pennsylvania Dutch. So let's talk about that first. Tell everyone about that experience. So you are now, and I don't, you're gonna have to remind me how many semesters you've been doing this now, but through the Berks History Center, based in Reading, there in Berks County, they have been doing and offering online Pennsylvania Dutch classes, and Ethan has been instructing. So talk about that experience really quickly. What are you doing? What does that look like? If I'm a student in your class, how is it? How do I learn a language over Zoom? Those types of things.
Yeah, it's definitely been something, because I've never taught a class in person before, so I've only ever taught on Zoom. So I think maybe struggles that you or other teachers would have is not something I'd have, just because this is the only way I know how to do it. But yeah, so I've been teaching Pennsylvania Dutch, as you said, with the Berks History Center in Reading for 3 semesters now. I started in May of last year, and we just wrapped up the spring semester at the end of April. And I've been teaching particularly intermediate and advanced level, but we do have beginners as well. What that looks like, well, we use for the intermediate and advanced courses, we use your textbook, Schwätzmal Deutsch, and we build our lessons based on the individual chapters in that textbook. And every week we go down and we have like a main grammar topic for the week. So let's say one week is, and I'm going to get very into linguistics, so I apologize to people who are like not familiar specifically with German. Um, but like one week will be the dative case, and we'll tackle the dative case, and it's it's all PowerPoints, and we'll break it down. This is what the dative case means, this is how it's employed, all of that, and then we'll get some speaking practice in with it, and we'll have some fill in the blanks, whatever, stuff like that. and we'll have a section about vocabulary. So we'll cover, probably whatever's in your textbook, parts of the body, things like that. And as I alluded to earlier, we try to get speaking practice in. There's dialogues that we do. There's short stories that have been pulled from Schwarzwald-Deutsch, that have been pulled from a simple grammar of Pennsylvania German. Um, and I assign homework. So it's very much like a regular class or a regular. I think it acts a little bit more like a university class than it does a high school Spanish class, because we don't meet every day and there's lectures rather than interactive presentations and things like that. Um, so that's what the intermediate and advanced levels look like. The beginners is pretty much the same, except they use a component written by Bradley Smith.
So
So
my question to you is the students that you've taught, who are these people? Are they younger? Are they old? Is it a mix? Why are they taking these classes? What are they telling you? Why are people signing up to do this, and who are these people?
yeah, so it's a bit of a mix. We have some older people, we have some middle-aged people, we've got some younger people. I'd say the youngest students I personally have been in their 30s. But we also have, I know, one of the other sections, I think there was a student who was maybe like in their 20s. And a lot of these people have connections to Pennsylvania German heritage. They'll have, they'll have done genealogical research maybe, or they grew up in the area around Pennsylvania Dutch speaking parents or grandparents, and they're like, well, I never understood what was going on, but I remember these sayings, and I want to know, how to do it, and I want to learn to speak their language. So just a lot of personal interest, really. I think there have also been, I mean, we've had students that work with the Amish and the Mennonites that want to be able to communicate with them in the language that's comfortable for them. So we really have a diverse group of students that just, whether it's for their own reasons or to help others, they just want to get involved.
Okay, I have some follow-up questions. So you've mentioned already, like, teaching online is like putting on an old pair of shoes for you. You've done it for a while, you know what you're doing, you feel comfortable doing it. But specifically now teaching Pennsylvania Dutch, because that you haven't been doing for years and years.
Right.
How has this experience, particularly with the Pennsylvania Dutch, been for you?
It's been like a dream come true, not to sound dramatic.
No, be dramatic. I want
it's
why was that the first thing that you said?
I've always wanted to do something with the Pennsylvania Dutch language. I've always wanted to do something for our people. And I sort of got down on myself because I was like, well, I live in Canada, and like I don't live near St. Jacobs where the Pennsylvania Dutch speaking people in Canada live. And, I felt very far removed. But when I connected with Brad Smith, and he was like, we're going to offer these courses at the Berks History Center. Would you like to teach? I was like, heck yes, I want to teach Pennsylvania Dutch. And, yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot from my students. I mean, I speak it well enough to teach it, obviously, but my Pennsylvania Dutch, I find, has gotten better because I think in it, several weeks out of the year, multiple times a year. So, it's been great because I've improved my language and I've helped people connect with our language. And, it really like ticks all the boxes of like anything I'd want to be doing. I mean, this is why I studied linguistics. I love language revitalization, and I fell in love with language revitalization in university, and I always wanted to apply it to our language, and I get to do that, which is just I'm so thankful for that.
You've hinted at this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. You can maybe go a little farther. What have you learned from doing this? But you already said, yeah, my Dutch has gotten better, but I'm sure you've
Right.
learned other things too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I I think like all Pennsylvania Dutch people, especially people that are in your shoes that work with the language, I it can be hard it can be hard to be optimistic about the language sometimes. And so I'm like, ugh, why am I doing this? Sometimes because even though I love this, and I just, finished saying that I'd love to do nothing else but this. I I still have moments where I'm like, is this all for naught? Am I going to be done? Am I going to like, luckily, I'm still in my 20s, so like at least there will be some non-Amish, non-Mennonite person speaking Pennsylvania Dutch. But I've learned that it's not all for naught. I mean, there's so many people that want to connect, that are desperate to connect, that have never had the opportunity to do this before. And with the advent of Zoom classes, I mean, Zoom's been around for a while, but the fact that half of my degree was done online, essentially, um, you know, I think a lot of people have said this is the opportunity that we've always needed, and so now we're seeing this growing number. I mean, I think the first semester there were like 200 students or 250 students or something insane, and this past semester I think we had around 100. i I'm not sure. I know that in I taught 30 students, 15 in the or 16 in the um, well, my math is bad, but I taught 16 in one section and I taught like 10 or 11 in the other. So around 30 students. And that's just two sections out of like six or seven. So I've learned that people are desperate's a little bit strong, but people are really itching to connect with the language. And that's something that I always thought was like a me interest, but it's actually the interest of many people in our community and people who are adjacent to our community.
Having done what I've done for as long as I have, that makes me sound old, but yeah, I mean, if anything good has come out of the pandemic, has been this revitalization. I truly believe that through Zoom, through internet, through I mean things as stupid as Facebook, but it's bringing people together and allowing for opportunities that didn't exist. You know, if you were a 20 something in 1995 and you wanted to connect and your grandparents had already passed away and you didn't have, how were you ever going to learn Pennsylvania Dutch? And even like we'll take it to like 2005. None of those were opportunities that were out there. And now it truly seems like the opportunities are endless in the sense of what is out there for people, whether it is taking classes online or even the people that don't necessarily want to learn the language, but would like to learn about our art, about our history, our stories. There's all these avenues now for people to do that otherwise, 30 years ago, you had to go to some university library, find a book, and then read some academic's description of all this stuff, which for some people that's fine, but for most people, that's not their cup of tea. So, I mean, I truly think, you know, I agree with you. There were times, and I still do this too. I will find times where I'm like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Because is it for naught? I mean, 30 years from now, what's it going to look like? And I have also come to the conclusion, as you did, that even if it is for naught, I mean, I always look at like Martin Luther had a great quote that said, "If he knew that, even if I knew the world was going to end tomorrow, I would still plant my apple tree today." And
Yeah,
that's how I've taken a lot of solace in that quote and have used it to kind of like keep pushing me forward. So even if it is all for naught, what we're doing now is important for the people that want it now.
right,
And that's all that matters because tomorrow isn't a guarantee anyway. Who knows? Putin could
right.
push the red button tomorrow or
Yeah,
Kim Jong Un, and then it doesn't matter. It doesn't
yeah,
matter anyway, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how I've kind of dealt with some of the melancholy that comes with and frustration that comes with um, doing the work that we do because it can be frustrating when I and Josh Brown and a couple other people my age like Patrick Dunmoyer when we first started coming on the scene. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you or if you ever heard this story. We were not very welcome.
Really?
It was the old guard, and the old guard speaks a lot to Pennsylvania Dutch culture. They were scared of change. They didn't like young voices coming to the table. It was almost like it was the good old boys club. And I hate to use that term, but I mean, Josh and I presented our the first draft for our textbook at a kind of get together conference and it was like all the big hitters were there. C. Richard Beam, Earl Haig,
Wow.
Richard Druckenbrode, Druckenmiller, and all these I walked in that room. I was like, oh, it was like the 1927 New York Yankees were sitting there. It's like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, all
Yeah.
these. It's like the people whose books I had at home and the people that I only ever heard of their names, these types of things. And in we walked, and the vast majority of them were quite sour um, to us being there. And had it not been for like one or two of the guys who afterwards came out and specifically pulled us aside and said, "Don't listen to that. Keep doing what you're doing. we're going to be dead. You're alive, you're young. And that, I mean, and that's what and that's what I keep, I always have that in the back of my mind now that I'm getting older. It's like, I have to be C. Richard Beam, who pulled us aside and said, don't listen to that. Keep moving forward. Do what you're doing. You're doing
Yeah.
good work. You're doing work that matters. And I know that's what you're doing. That's what the people at the Berks History Center and a lot of other people that are doing what we're doing, and not just Pennsylvania Dutch. We look at a lot of minority ethnic languages in the United States that are fighting for survival, and Creole in Louisiana, and
Hmm.
some of these other southern dialects that are spoken like on the coastal South Carolina and all that, Gullah and all these other. I mean,
Hmm.
they're doing the same work we're doing, just with a different language. And if they're going to keep doing it, we have to keep doing it too. And that's kind of just how yeah, I don't know. That's just how I kind
No,
of look at it, I
I
guess.
I feel the same way, and I haven't heard that about the greats of our people, as are the brains of our people. I haven't heard that about them before, but it makes sense, just knowing. I think maybe they, well, I don't know, I don't want to surmise because I've never met them, but I think that there's just, for a number of reasons, there's a reason why Pennsylvania Dutch is not spoken outside of the Amish and Mennonites anymore. And I think that we have to examine that. I think we as Pennsylvania Dutch people need to take a step back and say, okay, well, we know this happened. We know there was anti-German sentiment. We know whatever. And I think that we as a people need to, examine that. But I think that also helps me understand the people who maybe were in your, when you were, showing your draft of Schwetzmal-Deitsch. I think, it's a lot of people that, like you said, are afraid of change, but I think also knew, or maybe I don't know. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. Our people are very interesting.
Oh, that is one good way of putting it. Well, I want to close this part of our conversation with a question that somebody asked me. I was doing a podcast one time, and I honestly don't remember who asked me this question, but it totally took me by surprise. And I want to I want to hear your response to this question, because no one ever asked me this before, and I want to ask it to you. How do you feel when you speak Pennsylvania Dutch?
Connected. I feel a deep connection to my ancestors, to my grandparents, to the land, to I think I understand Pennsylvania a lot more because I speak Pennsylvania Dutch. I mean, and not to compare this to Indigenous people, because Indigenous people have a much older, much deeper connection, but I think when I drive through Pennsylvania Dutch country, my grandparents live in northern Dauphin County. My Dutch roots aren't in Berks County. I mean, a long time ago, but they're in northern Dauphin County now. When I drive through northern Dauphin County, it just feels, and like, just knowing that I speak the language of the people there, it just makes me feel like this is home. This, right here is home. I've never lived in northern Dauphin County, but this, that is home for me in a lot of ways. And it just, yeah, it's connected. That's like the one word that, that comes to mind
It's
immediately.
it's I'm I said the same after I was taken aback, and I said, I have to really think about that. But I had almost the exact same answer that you just did, which doesn't surprise me. I figured you probably would go in that direction. Um, but it's funny, I've thought a lot about that since I was asked that question, and I don't feel that connectedness or a sense of connection with English. And I've
Hmm.
spoken English my whole life, as growing up, and I spoke English with my family as well, but I also spoke Pennsylvania Dutch. Um, but I feel no sense of connection to the English language. And I would wager if you asked the typical American on the street, they probably would say the same thing. But it is such a different feeling. I've often heard people say, if you speak a second language or a third language, your personality is different when you speak that language. And
Yeah,
I find that to be true for myself, to a
yeah.
certain extent. And not like I completely change as a person, but you you do you do change a little bit. And I have to agree with you 100% in the sense that when I'm speaking Pennsylvania Dutch, it is that sense, and you said it too, that sense of I'm connected to the people that came before me, people I never met, you know.
Hmm.
But as Richard Mamana said when I interviewed him, he said, but they were the hands that held me. And
Yeah.
it's a beautiful concept. And, that can extend for generations, countless generations, right? Um, and for whatever reason, the food has its place, art has its place. But when I'm speaking Pennsylvania Dutch or when I hear Pennsylvania Dutch, that's when I feel the most connected to who I am as a
Right.
person.
Well, that's because you and I are both language people. I
That's
mean, I think, but I don't mean to like, minimize that because that's the same for me. It's when I speak the language do I feel the most connected. But like Rachel Yoder, for instance, feels the most connected when she's painting, and you know, I, I've spoken to my grandmother about this. It's like because she grew, like I said, she grew up speaking it, but like as she got older, it's not it sort of as most Pennsylvania Dutch people that were born in the 40s, it just sort of goes away. So I said to her, what is, I've spoken to her, like, what is your, like, what is Pennsylvania Dutch to you? When you think of like Pennsylvania Dutchness, like, what is your, you know, what is that for you? And for her, it's cooking and it's eating. And I mean, you're right. Food does have its place. It has actually a pretty big place in Pennsylvania Dutch. I mean, I have memories of making Fosnacks with her, eating, red pickled red beet eggs, and Glühwein. I think is a little bit more Germany German, but we made Glühwein at Christmas time, and just having that is, and and not to dissuade to move too much past the Pennsylvania Dutch, but I feel that way. I mean, as someone who's spiritual, I'm religiously Jewish. I feel that praying in Hebrew, even though I don't speak Hebrew, I don't necessarily understand what's being said. I know that this is the language that my ancestors for thousands of years have spoken and prayed in. That ritualistic aspect, which I know not everyone is keen on ritual in their religious practice, but it's important to me.
Yeah, me
Um,
too. Me too. Yeah, yeah.
that praying in Hebrew is like it's the same thing. It's like I feel connected, and Pennsylvania Dutch is speaking Pennsylvania Dutch is sort of like a religious experience for me too, in some ways.
We're gonna close that part of the conversation out on that quote because that was
Yeah.
beautiful. That was beautiful. Ethan, I like to close every episode with 10 quick questions that I ask all of my guests, and they have nothing to do with anything we talked about before. It has more of an opportunity for us to get to know Ethan a little bit better. So, are you ready for your 10 quick questions, Ethan?
I think so.
Here we go. Question number one: what is your morning drink of choice?
Water. I'm a big
Water.
water. I'm a big water drinker. I am drinking water right now. I coffee and tea have their place, and I like them both. But water. I
Boy,
always drink
the
water.
Canadians are big coffee drinkers. I wondered if that had rubbed off on you at all while you being up
Well,
there.
I mean, I do love a good Tim Hortons run at a when it's appropriate. And I mean, Canadians are big on tea too, just because
Yeah.
of the being the British aspect. I think there's a
Hmm.
lot of tea culture here too. But no, water. I
That's
love
all right.
water.
That's all right. Number two, who is a go-to musical artist or group for you?
Oh, there's so many. Um, Joni Mitchell,
Ah,
actually.
yeah.
Joni Mitchell. I love Joni Mitchell. And when she released her live album from the Newport Folk Festival
Yeah.
recently that she did with Brandy Carlisle, it was like it. I don't know if you like listened to Joni Mitchell, but that album was just amazing. I mean, she had an aneurysm and bounced back so
Yeah.
well from it,
Yeah.
and just
Right.
does such. I mean, she had to learn how to like walk and talk again, let alone sing.
Yeah.
She's incredible.
Yeah. Oh, agreed. 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 All right. Number three, what movie can you watch over and over again and it never gets old?
The Sound of Music. I love The Sound of Music. It's my favorite movie. I've watched it probably since I was an infant. I love that movie.
It is a good film. Absolutely. Number four, what is the last thing that you read?
I wish I read more. I recently read this like a morbid title for people. I think my generation knows a little bit more about this person, but Jeanette McCurdy's memoir "I'm Glad My Mom Died" is it's like I said, a very morbid title, but it's about her. It's a memoir, and she is a child actress. She was in the I she was in iCarly, which is a sitcom that
Oh,
my
yeah.
generation grew
Yeah.
up watching, and her like a lot of child stars. her mom forced her to act, and
Yeah.
influenced her with a lot of bad behaviors. And you know, I, I should just clarify for people who are like, how dare you say that about someone's mom? She it's more of it's the title is for the shock value. She's not actually glad her mom died, but the book is called "I'm Glad My Mom Died," and it's tragic, but it's so well written.
Yeah.
It's so well written.
No, good, 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 good. Number 5. What is your favorite pizza topping?
I should add this to the list of things I miss about the U.S. I miss eggplant on pizza. It's like not a thing here. Eggplant
Yeah.
is my favorite topping on pizza. Um, that or like a white pizza. I love
Yep.
that. Like with
Yep.
ricotta. Love
Mm-hmm.
that.
That's good. Laying on the beach or going for a hike?
Um, that's hard. Uh, you know, I would normally say hike. I love hiking, but I really love sitting on the beach too. So I'm gonna have to go with beach.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Number 7. You have invited me over for dinner. What are you making?
Well, I do love to cook, and I would probably make us an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert. Can I give you an appetizer, entree, and a dessert?
Absolutely. Hey, I'm come for
Okay.
dinner. Absolutely.
Okay. So as an appetizer, I would make a garlic butter baked brie, which I
Okay.
recently learned how to make, and it's decadent. Entree, I would probably make salmon Dijonnaise, which is a recipe that my mom taught me how to make, and it's easy but also really delicious. And for dessert, mm, this is hard. I would say, not that you asked me to give you a three-course meal. I kind of gave this issue to myself. I've given you two dishes already. Um, I would say, oh, zucchini brownies, 100% zucchini brownies.
Okay.
They're so
Okay.
good. Don't knock it till you try it. They're so
Well,
good.
when we always get rogue zucchinis that people drop off on our front porch. I never grow
Yes.
zucchinis because people always give them to us.
Yeah.
Zucchini bread and muffins are a go-to.
Yeah.
So I have never had the brownie version, but I'm sure it's just as good as the bread. I have a killer zucchini bread recipe that is delicious. Okay, number 8, dream vacation destination.
Um, I have a lot of friends that live in Japan, so I'd probably say Japan. I've never
I
been. I've never been to Asia,
I haven't
but I'd
either,
like to
and
go.
I'd really like to see Japan myself someday. That'd be a good one. Number 9, what's something you're afraid of?
Bugs. I don't like bugs.
Okay,
Stink bugs in particular. Not that they like bite or anything. I just hate them.
because they're everywhere.
Not in Canada yet, luckily. Not in Canada
Oh,
yet. But
really?
I but
There's no
every
they
time
didn't make it across the border yet. Okay,
I think in some places there, but my I haven't seen any in my neighborhood. Knock on wood. I
knock
don't
on
want
wood.
to
There
see
we go.
them come in.
Sounds good. All right, last question, number 10. What job, other than one that you've had, would you love to have?
Um, well, I don't have this because I'm like so early in my career. I just give a job that I'd like to have in the future that
Sure,
I haven't.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
would love to be a professor. I would love to be a university professor, like whether it's like linguistics or I don't know, probably linguistics. I would love to be a university professor.
I think you would do an excellent job molding
Thank
the youth
you.
of America or of
Thank
Canada.
you.
Sorry.
Well, yeah. Well, it could be American. There's American
Yeah,
students that come to
yeah,
Canada like
sure.
me. There's I might teach an American one
There we go.
day.
Ethan, it has been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation tonight. I got to know you a little bit better, and I'm glad that we were able to make that work. Please keep doing the good work that you're doing. I know that we'll have, I'm sure, future projects that we're going to be hopefully working on as time moves forward. Wish you all the best, and the next time I make my way to Ontario, I will let you know when we're headed that way.
Yes, let me know. I'd love to connect. And yeah, thank you for having me.
No, thanks so much, Ethan. Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Your ratings and reviews will help others find the show. You can follow along on Facebook, X, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. If you would like to financially support our endeavors, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. I thank you in advance for any contributions. Please feel free to tell all your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on my front porch.